talk to you about what's logical, what makes common sense in the world that we know. Here's a thought. A man that's been dead for 3 days, being raised from the dead. Surely that's impossible. Or another thought. A boy who's been possessed by a demon, being freed from it. That's impossible. A widow whose son is dead, being raised to life. That's impossible. Men in a boat out fishing, caught no fish for the day, and yet they throw the nets over the other side and catch a net full of fish. That's impossible. What about a group of men being healed at a pool? Impossible. A fig tree that just dies from somebody speaking a word. Surely that's impossible. It's quite logical, isn't it? Life is full of impossibilities. A man can only do what a man can do. What about it when it comes round to tax time and you've got no tax to pay and it gets provided? I think that's impossible. Or when there's a group of people that need feeding and all you have is a small lunchbox of food and they all get fed. That's impossible. Have you ever heard of a man that can just walk on water? I don't think so. That's impossible. What about a storm that's raging, a storm that's been blowing for hours and yet it just stops? Nah, that's impossible. Maybe your life is like mine, full of impossibilities. My life can be transformed. Impossible. My emotional hurts, my physical burdens, they can be healed and taken away. That's impossible. What about the virgin birth? That's impossible. What about water being turned into wine? That's impossible. What about you being provided with the miracle son? I think that's impossible. God wanting to use me for his plan and purpose. That's impossible. It is said that when you travel at a speed of in excess of 200 kilometres an hour, that tunnel vision occurs. Have you ever felt like that you're in a tunnel and all what's in front of you is a wall of impossibilities? Young man said, "Get up." Then the dead boy sat up and began to talk to those around him. Then he said, "Throw into a net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get plenty of fish." So they did, and they couldn't throw the net because there were so many fish in it. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them, walking on the water. So Jesus cast out the demon, and instantly the man could talk. The angel replied, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the baby born to you will be holy, and he will be called the Son of God. For nothing is impossible with God." Your impossibilities becoming possibilities is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Maybe it's about time you and I stop putting God in a box and allow him to push our horizon to the beyond.
This morning, are you putting God in a box? Are you putting God in a box? Are you making things impossible because you put God in a box? The Bible tells us that through him all things are possible, right? Through Jesus, through God, all things are possible. If you got your Bible this morning, I want you to turn over to Romans chapter 4. And if I had a thought for just a few minutes, it's birthing impossibilities. Birthing impossibilities. In Romans Romans chapter 4, we're just going to start reading in verse 19. It says, "And being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body, now dead, when he was about 100 years old, neither yet the deadness of Sarah's womb." Now we're talking about Abraham and Sarah here, right? Everybody's saying, well, this is the New Testament. They happened way back over in the Old Testament. Why are we talking about Abraham and Sarah? And if you read through there, it sounds like a totally different couple than what we read about over the Old Testament. You see, when God promised Abraham and Sarah a child, they're thinking, like some of us at Abraham's age of 100, they're estimating that Sarah was around 90 at this time. They're probably like the rest of us thinking, yeah, right. Has anybody ever heard of a 90-year-old woman giving birth to a child? That's impossible, isn't it? But with God, what? It becomes possible, doesn't it? So what's happening here is Abraham they're talking about Abraham having faith and having faith in what God said that He's going to do. If you start reading down in verse 20, it says, "He staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith, giving glory to God." 21 says, "And being fully persuaded that what He had promised, He was able also to perform." This morning I want to talk to you just for a short time about what God has promised you. What God has promised you. You know, you get some misconceptions sometimes of what we think that God has promised us. Did God promise you an easy life? Did God promise you a full bank account? Did God promise you a Cadillac? Did God promise you a life of ease? Without any problems at all? He didn't, did He? He didn't promise any of us that. But He did promise us one thing. And I say it all the time. And it's something that keeps me going. He promised to go with us, didn't He? He promised to be there for us. He promised anytime we need Him, we could call upon His name. And He would be there. He promised us very many things. He promised us that if we believed on Him that we'd have eternal life, didn't He? He promised us that His Son, if we believed in His Son, that we could go and live with Him. He promised us that He would go with us everywhere. He promised us that at the midnight hour when we needed Him the most and nobody was there to listen, He would be there. Has He ever failed you this morning? Has He ever failed you? God made that promise too, didn't He? He would never fail us. Has He failed anybody here? Nobody's raising any hands anywhere. He has never failed us, folks, this morning. You see, Abraham and Sarah were getting up in years, weren't they? They were fixing to birth an impossibility. They were fixing to birth an impossibility. But just like us, back in the Old Testament, there was some doubt going on there, wasn't there? If you read that story, Abraham even laughed, didn't he? When God said that. He even laughed. Do we do that sometimes? We do, don't we? God says, cast all your cares upon me. Give me your problems, I want them. We laugh sometimes, don't we? God, don't worry about this, I can help this. Don't worry about this, God, I can give you this. This is a little bitty thing, and I don't want to give it to you. I don't want to give it to you. I don't want to burden you down. You've got like miracles to perform. You've got cancer to heal. You've got things going off. You've got lost people to save. I don't want to bother you with these problems, but He didn't say, bring me the big problems. I don't care about your little ones. You can handle them yourself. He didn't say that, did He? See, cast all your cares upon Him. Cast them all upon Him. In Matthew 19, verse 26, it says, "But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, with men this is impossible." Just like Abraham and Sarah fixing to have this child. With men, thinking about it in today's time, with our thinking and our science, this is impossible. You know, it's some of the things that we think about in our lives that's going on right now. We may have family addicted to drugs. With men getting off those drugs may be impossible. We may have problems in our financial life, in our married life. We may be having problems in our work life. With men, those things seem impossible to fix. What does Matthew tell us? He goes on down and said, with men, these things are impossible. But with God, what? All things are possible. Is that not something to cling on to this morning? Amen. Birthing impossibilities this morning. birthing impossibilities. Things that we thought were so far-fetched that there's no way that could happen. What have we done? We've put God in a box. We've put God in a box. If you think about it in fish terms, is anybody familiar with fish? Good, I can make this up. Good job. Fish, you can put fish in an aquarium, right? And they'll only get as big as the aquarium. That's the same way as God in your life. If you only give Him a small part of your life, He's going to remain small in your life. But if you put Him out in the ocean, out in the big end, out in the deep end where the big boys swim, if you put Him in that, He's going to become big. He's going to become big in your life. Why? Because you're giving Him full control. You're not limiting Him to what He can do. You're not putting boundaries upon what God can do. When I think about giving these impossible stories and making them possible, there's two that really sticks out in mind. And there's probably a whole plethora of different ones. But the two that stick out in my mind is Jairus' daughter. Does everybody remember that story? You know, Jairus came to get Jesus, and about that time the woman touched the hem of his garment. Does everybody remember that? And he stopped. I'm sure they're like, come on, she's about dead. But when Jesus got her there, He walked in and He said, she's not dead, she's just asleep. But there wasn't any appearance of any life left in her body, was it? That was impossible, what they were thinking. But God was fixing to make things possible. They mocked Jesus and laughed at Him because they didn't believe that this man could do the impossible. But He told her, He said, wake up, get up. Get up, little girl, wake up. And what did she do? She woke up. She made it possible for me. The other one I think about is Lazarus. And I can't even say that name. I'm talking about that. I'm talking to Lazarus. Is that right? I'm not asking you. By the time he got there, Mary and Martha walked out. Martha did, and said, if you'd been here, you're late. You're too late. With God, it's still an impossibility. He said, Lazarus, come forward. He said, but now he's stinking. Right? Lazarus, come forward. There's many others of impossibilities in our eyes that we think, and if we were doing them, they would be impossible, wouldn't they? Sometimes God likes to do the impossible things just to show how great and wonderful He is. Don't He? Sometimes, everybody believe that? God likes to show off a little? Sometimes? God likes to show what He can do. But if you put Him in a box, if you put Him in that small aquarium, He's only going to get that big. But if you think about the others, Jesus turned water into wine. Have we ever done that? I mean, I'm sure there's some type of chemistry that you can perform. But in sandals and a robe, back in those times, could you perform those type of chemistry experiments? What about feeding the 5,000? Do you remember that story? That's an impossibility. The healing of the lame, the blind, the dumb. That was all impossibility in those people's eyes. You see, church, that's what I'm talking about this morning. If we allow God full control of our lives, if we allow God to swim in the big end with us, if we put God, tear the box open and let Him out, He can perform those impossibilities in our lives. I think about a story that I think about most, that I've been affected by, is the story of this church. Has anybody ever read that part of the story? It's on the internet. Go there. GraceFellowshipJamestown.com. But I'm going to tell you just a little bit of it right here. Years and years and years ago, when I was a wee lad, not hardly that long ago, Dad had been to many different churches and basically almost started from the ground up at churches, but never really started a church before. Am I telling this right? Many started at churches with 8, 10, 15 people at these churches. He was driving by one day and saw this church here. Boy, I thought that was a good location for a church. I'd like to start a church something like that. It'd have to be a good location. At that time, I think the church may have been sitting empty at that time. Not for sure. But years went by. Dad probably somewhat even forgot about that he had made that statement years ago. Thought in an okay spot in his life. But God was fixing to make those impossible things possible. Just like what He's telling you this morning. With the testimony that He shared this morning, 6-8 months ago, the possibility that God has allowed to happen in his life. And he'll get the ability to share that. He'll get the chance to share that with you at some point. Those things that have happened in his life that he thought at that time was impossible. Folks, He's done just exactly what we can do this morning. We can put those problems, whether it be, like I said a minute ago, whether it be problems with somebody in our family that's addicted to drugs. That seems like an impossibility that we can't fix, doesn't it? That's something that we can't fix ourselves. It's bigger than us, isn't it? If it's problems in our work relationships, problems in our lives, if it's problems in our marriage, it might be too big for us to fix. But nothing is impossible when you put it in God's hands. Nothing is impossible when you turn it over to God. Let me tell you a secret. We shouldn't worry about turning things over to God because why? He's got our best interest at heart. We're His children. Just like I said on Wednesday night. We're His kids. We're His children. Just like with your children, you're not going to want to do them wrong. You're not going to want to see them hurt. You're not going to want to put them in a bad spot. But just like your children, if they don't listen to you, it's not going to do them any good, is it? We've got to be just like that with God. Folks, someone here this morning, I want y'all to stand. I'm not going to ask anybody to come to the piano just yet. But I want everybody to really search their lives. I want you to close your eyes and bow your head this morning. And I want you to really open up your heart. Open up your mind. And I want you to think about your own life. Someone here this morning is dealing with something that they've tried to handle themselves. But it's just too big. It's just too big in their life that they need to turn it over to God this morning. Folks, the altar is open. That's the first step of turning it over to Him, is humbling yourselves before Him. Giving it to Him. Folks, there may be somebody here this morning that you're just not wanting to bother God with your problems because you think it's something that you've messed up yourself. But you'll need to fix it yourself. Don't put God in a box. He's waiting to birth the impossible in your life. Things that you thought were too small for Him. Things that you thought wasn't of any concern of His because He had no problem in creating it. It was all you. He's wanting to help you this morning with it. Are you willing to turn it over to Him? He wants you to bring all that to Him. He wants all your cares. He wants all your problems. He wants all your fears. All your worries. He wants them this morning. Are you willing to give them to Him? Are you willing to turn your life over to Him and say, Jesus, I'm yours. Mold me, make me. You're the potter and I'm the clay. Make me into what you'd have me to be this morning. Is that a step that you're willing to make this morning for Him? To birth the impossible in your life. He's much too big. He's much too powerful. He cares too much about you to limit Him and put Him in a box this morning. He's a specialist in all fields. He's a specialist this morning in all fields. Folks, He cares for you. He loves you. He wants what's best for you. Open your eyes this morning. I appreciate your all's attention this morning. I hope that you've done just exactly what God has wanted you to do in this service. I hope that you've not put God in a box. If so, I hope the tape don't stick good. I hope the tape don't stick good and that lid flops open and absolutely blesses your socks off. I bet when Jeannie came up here this morning, she didn't know all that was going to happen. But it just goes to show you, when you let God in, and you let Him use you, there's no telling what can happen in your life. You ask Jeannie to come up here right now and start talking to y'all, she probably couldn't do it. She's too backwards for that. God can make things possible. God can make the things in your lives that seem like it's unattainable. It seems like there's no way that a $30 bill can be paid with $25 in the checking account. God can make it possible. God can make things. Everybody believe that this morning? Raise them hands if you believe that God can make all things possible. He's awesome, man. He's awesome this morning. Does anybody have anything to put in the service?